Which generation is the best? This question often arises in family debates, heated discussions on social media, and even in academic spaces. For many, the answer seems obvious. The baby boomers, who grew up in an era marked by post-war economic prosperity and profound cultural transformations such as the civil rights movement and counterculture. Others argue in favor of the millennials, a resilient generation that has faced global economic crises like the one in 2008, while leading movements for sustainability and social justice. Some claim that Generation X, quiet and pragmatic, played a crucial role in adapting society to the digital world, while Generation Z, with its fluency in technology and engagement in global causes, is shaping the future in unprecedented ways. But does it really make sense to search for the best generation? Or are all generations merely reflections of the historical, social, and cultural circumstances they experienced? To start answering this question, we must understand that the history of generations is far more complex than labels and stereotypes suggest. Baby boomers are not just the generation of consumerism, they also witnessed and participated in major social changes, such as the rise of feminism and the environmental movement. Generation X, often described as cynical or indifferent, was actually a pioneer in adapting to a world where institutions started to lose credibility, playing a crucial role in the technological transition that changed how we live and work. Millennials, labeled as self-centered or technology-dependent, have faced structural challenges like increasing job insecurity and student debt. Despite that, they have reinvented the way we perceive work, consumption, and social relationship. Lastly, Generation Z, often accused of living only in the digital world, brings a more inclusive and globalized perspective, advocating for causes such as diversity, mental health, and climate change. Understanding generations is not about creating competition between them, but about recognizing how each has been shaped by the conditions of its time. Baby boomers were born into a world rebuilt after World War II, with political and economic stability never seen before. Generation X grew up under the uncertainties of the Cold War and the rise of neoliberalism. Millennials entered adulthood during the rise of the internet and the global financial collapse, while Generation Z was born into a hyper-connected world where access to information and overwhelming stimuli redefined the way we interact. But why is it important to understand these differences? Because generational tensions do not stem from natural competitiveness, but rather from rapid and challenging changes that affect groups in different ways. While baby boomers could rely on greater economic stability and continuous growth, millennials and Generation Z face scenarios of greater inequality, climate crises, and challenges that seem more complex than ever. This does not mean that one generation is better or worse than another, but rather that each has something unique to offer. In this video, we will explore how these generations have been shaped by historical, economic, and social contexts, and how, together, they can overcome the global challenges we face today. After all, the real question is not which generation is the best, but rather how can we learn from each other to build a more balanced and sustainable future. Throughout history, humanity has always been divided by age groups that experience the world in very different ways. The baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964, are often associated with post-war prosperity. They grew up in a period of economic expansion, political stability, and industrial advancement. This generation witnessed major social transformation movements, such as the civil rights movement in the United States and the hippie movement, which challenged cultural norms of the time. Many also consider this generation as the founders of the concept of a solid career, with stable jobs that lasted for decades. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980, grew up during a time of transition and uncertainty. They experienced the Cold War, the economic crises of the 1970s, and the rise of neoliberalism. Known as a resilient and independent generation, Gen Xers began questioning the authority of major institutions, developing a natural skepticism. This was the generation that lived through the transition from analog to digital, witnessing the rise of personal computers, video games, and the internet. The Millennials, also known as Generation Y, were born between 1981 and 1996. This generation was deeply shaped by technology and social media. Unlike previous generations, millennials faced major structural challenges, such as increasing student debt and job market instability. At the same time, they are considered more connected, innovative, and socially and environmentally conscious. They were the first generation to enter the workforce in a globalized world filled with uncertainty. Finally, we have Generation Z, born between 1997 and 2010, who have never known a world without smartphones, social media, or high-speed internet. They are called digital natives because technology is not just a tool, but an integral part of their lives. This generation is deeply engaged in issues such as climate change, diversity, and mental health. Growing up in a hyper-connected environment, Generation Z has unlimited access to information but also faces unique challenges such as the impact of digital overexposure on their emotional well-being. But what defines these generations beyond their birth years? According to the theory presented in The Fourth Turning by William Strauss and Neil Howe, generations are shaped by historical cycles or turnings. Each cycle consists of 4 phases, where generations play unique roles depending on the historical context in which they live. For example, the baby boomers emerged during a period of high after World War II, while the millennials grew up during a period of unraveling, characterized by weakened institutions and deeper structural challenges. Understanding these generations is crucial because they are not just divisions based on age, but reflections of historical, political, and cultural events that profoundly shape how each group perceives the world. Recognizing these characteristics helps break stereotypes and fosters more constructive dialogue between different groups. After all, by examining these differences, we realize that the true value lies in the diversity of experiences and perspectives that each generation brings. Generations do not emerge in a vacuum. They are shaped by the historical and social context in which they live, reacting to the challenges and opportunities of their time. To understand the relationship between generations and historical events, it is essential to explore the theory of historical cycles presented in The Fourth Turning by William Strauss and Neil Howe. According to this theory, history follows cyclical patterns of approximately 80 to 100 years, divided into 4 main stages called turnings. Each phase profoundly influences the personality and values of the generations that live through them. The first turning, or high, is an era of optimism and institutional strengthening, where there is a sense of unity and progress. This occurred in the post-World War II period, when the baby boomers were born amid Reconstruction and economic growth. This period laid the foundation for a more stable society, but also brought a culture of conformity and collective idealism. The second turning, or awakening, is characterized by cultural and spiritual revolutions, where individuals begin to question established norms. This was the period of counterculture and civil rights movements in the 1960s and 1970s, shaping the youth of Generation X. During this phase, society seeks new values, challenging the institutions that seemed so solid in the previous era. The third turning, or unraveling, is a time of heightened individualism and weakening institutions. It reflects the era of political and economic uncertainties in the 1980s and 1990s when the millennials grew up. During this period, people lose trust in the system. Intense cultural conflicts arise, and society enters a sort of survival mode, seeking immediate solutions to ongoing crises. Finally, the fourth turning, or crisis, is a period of upheaval where institutions are dismantled and replaced by new ones. This is the moment in which Generation Z currently finds itself facing global challenges such as climate change, rising inequalities, and technological transformations that call into question the very future of humanity. Historically, this stage has been marked by great revolutions, including wars and profound structural changes. These cycles help explain why certain generations seem so different from one another. Each generation plays a specific role in a moment of transformation, whether as builders of new institutions, challengers of the system, or agents of radical change. For instance, baby boomers were shaped by the prosperity and optimism of the first turning, while millennials grew up amid the disillusionment and uncertainties of the third turning. Now, Generation Z is coming of age in the midst of a global crisis that demands reinvention and resilience. Moreover, this perspective on historical cycles invites us to think that no generation is inherently better or worse than another. Each one is a response to the circumstances of its time and fulfills a role in the continuous flow of history. Understanding these cycles is essential to breaking down stereotypes that often distort perceptions of generations and recognizing the importance of each group in shaping society. After all, rather than focusing on generational conflicts, it is far more productive to understand how they complement one another. If we look at historical cycles as a whole, we realize that true progress only happens when the forces of innovation, reflection, and reconstruction work together, bringing different experiences and perspectives toward a common future. The baby boomers represent a unique generation, born during a period of great optimism and economic growth after World War II. They were given this name due to the baby boom, the explosion of births recorded between 1946 and 1964 when global political and economic conditions stabilized, providing security and hope for families. However, what defines this generation goes beyond demographic statistics. It is the events, values, and social transformations that deeply shape their behavior and legacy. This generation grew up in a world full of opportunities. In the West, particularly in countries like the United States and Europe, baby boomers experienced the golden years of industrial capitalism, where economic stability allowed access to stable jobs, home ownership, and mass consumption. They witnessed the rise of the American dream, the ideal of personal and collective progress achieved through hard work. However, these privileged conditions were not equally extended to all parts of the world. In regions such as Latin America, Africa, and Asia, the same period was marked by decolonization struggles and political instability, demonstrating that the benefits of this boom were unevenly distributed. The baby boomers also participated in some of the most important social transformations of the 20th century. The civil rights movements in the United States, the fight against apartheid in South Africa, and the global feminist movement brought about profound changes. This generation was the first to experience youth culture as a global phenomenon, with milestones such as rock and roll, Woodstock, and the counterculture of the 1960s. They challenged the status quo on multiple fronts, questioning social norms and proposing new paths of expression and freedom. On the other hand, this same generation is often criticized for its impact on the environment and the economy. During the peak years of economic growth, mass consumption became a pillar of society, leading to accelerated resource exploitation and increased pollution. According to The Age of Unproductive Capital by Ladislav Daubor, the dominant economic model during the height of the baby boomers era promoted wealth concentration, laying the groundwork for structural inequalities that continue to affect subsequent generations. This generation also faced cultural paradoxes. While many baby boomers led progressive movements in their youth, a significant portion of them became more conservative over time, particularly regarding political and economic issues. This shift has created tensions with younger generations, who often criticize the boomers for perpetuating systems that are now facing serious crises, such as climate change and labor market precarity. Despite these criticisms, the baby boomers have left an undeniable legacy. They were pioneers in civil rights and technological advancements, shaping and witnessing events that defined the 20th century. This generation teaches us that progress is complex and often contradictory, and that great advancements can come with unexpected challenges. To fully understand the role of baby boomers in history, it is important to go beyond stereotypes. They are not just the generation that consumed the most resources or closed the doors for younger people, as they are often portrayed. They are also the generation that challenged social norms, embraced diversity, and fought for a more inclusive world. Looking at the impact of the baby boomers, we see that they laid many of the foundations of today's world, both in terms of achievements and problems. It is up to the next generations to learn from their successes and failures, using this legacy as a foundation to build solutions that address the needs of the present and future. Generation X was born into a world in transition. Spanning from 1965 to 1980, this generation grew up in the shadow of global events such as the Cold War, the economic crisis of the 1970s, and the rise of globalization. Marked by political and social uncertainties, Gen Xers developed characteristics that set them apart from both the idealistic baby boomers and the hyper-connected millennials. They are resilient, pragmatic, and deeply skeptical of institutions. While baby boomers grew up in an era of economic stability, Generation X faced a period of recession and stagnation. The 1973 oil crisis and high inflation created a scenario where many families had to adapt to new financial realities. This economic instability shaped a generation that was more independent and accustomed to doing whatever it takes to survive. Many of them were labeled the latchkey generation because, with both parents working or after divorces, they had to take on household responsibilities from an early age. Culturally, Generation X was profoundly influenced by the rise of media and entertainment. They grew up with the explosion of cable television, VHS tapes, and later personal computers. This was the generation that saw the rise of punk rock, grunge, and hip-hop, which echoed their spirit of rebellion and individualism. Movies like The Breakfast Club and Prozac Nation perfectly captured this generation's dilemma, young people trying to find their place in a world that seemed indifferent to them. Additionally, Generation X played a crucial role in the transition from the analog to the digital world. They witnessed the emergence of personal computers and, by the late 1990s, quickly adapted to the internet. As noted in Generations by Bobby Duffy, this generation was essential in bridging the gap between the old and new worlds, adapting to both emerging technologies and rapid cultural shifts. Socially, Gen Xers are often described as cynical and distrustful of major institutions. This did not happen by chance. They grew up watching governments face scandals, such as the Watergate affair in the United States, along with financial and political crises that shook public confidence. This disillusionment led many to adopt a more pragmatic and less idealistic approach to life. However, this skepticism did not prevent them from making significant contributions to society. As they entered the workforce, Gen Xers faced a corporate world in transformation. The book The Age of Unproductive Capital highlights how, during this period, traditional work structures began shifting towards more flexible and unstable models, something this generation learned to handle with resilience. Despite their tendency toward individualism, Generation X was also at the forefront of movements that challenged traditional norms, such as the rise of women in the workforce and the growing acceptance of diversity. Many of the values they upheld, such as authenticity and freedom of choice, became core principles for later generations. However, Gen Xers also face criticism. Often accused of sitting on the fence, especially in political matters, this generation is rarely seen leading major social movements. But this also reflects their adaptation to a world where pragmatism is valued more than idealism. Looking at Generation X, we see a generation forced to grow up amid transition, learning to balance traditional values with modern changes. They may not receive as much visibility as baby boomers or millennials, but their impact is undeniable. They paved the way for the digital society and cultural diversity we experience today. This generation teaches us that in times of uncertainty, adaptation and independence are essential. They remind us that even in the most unstable periods, there is strength in embracing pragmatism, questioning the status quo, and building new solutions for emerging challenges. Millennials, also known as Generation Y, are often remembered as the generation that grew up amid the rise of digital technologies and social media. Born between 1981 and 1996, they experienced an analog childhood before transitioning into a digital world, shaping their lives during a period of profound cultural, economic, and technological changes. Despite often being caricatured as self-centered or overly dependent on technology, millennials have faced unique challenges that have made them a resilient, innovative, and adaptable generation. One of the most significant milestones in millennials' lives was the technological revolution. They witnessed the emergence of tools that completely transformed how the world operates, from the popularization of the internet to the arrival of the first smartphones. While baby boomers and Generation X had to learn and adapt to digital technology, millennials were the first to naturally integrate it into their lives. This connection with technology has shaped how they interact, work, and consume information. However, this generation also grew up facing unprecedented economic hardships. The 2008 financial crisis hit just as many millennials were entering the workforce, profoundly impacting their financial and professional outlooks. According to The Age of Unproductive Capital by Ladislas Daubor, millennials face an economy characterized by job market instability, high levels of debt, and rising inequality. Many struggle to achieve traditional milestones of stability, such as buying homes or starting families, in a world where these goals are becoming increasingly unattainable. This generation is also marked by a significant shift in social values. Millennials are strong advocates for causes such as diversity, sustainability, and gender equality. They have brought crucial discussions to the forefront, including mental health awareness, representation, and the need to align consumption with environmental responsibility. The impact of social media, as highlighted in Generations by Bobby Duffy, has played a dual role. While it has democratized access to information and enabled new forms of activism, it has also contributed to challenges like hyperexposure and rising anxiety and depression among young people. Culturally, millennials have driven a revolution in both the job market and consumer behavior. They have challenged the traditional concept of linear careers, prioritizing work-life balance over rigid corporate structures. This shift has forced companies to rethink their approaches to flexibility and purpose. Additionally, millennials have transformed how we consume entertainment and products, fueling the rise of the subscription economy, experience-driven culture, and demand for socially responsible brands. However, millennials are not exempt from criticism. They are often labeled as the generation of expensive coffee and selfies, accused of being overly self-focused. These critiques, however, fail to consider the structural conditions that shaped this generation. Millennials are not just digital consumers, they are also the first to use these tools to question the status quo and create innovative solutions. In the workplace, for example, millennials have faced prejudices from older generations who often perceive them as impatient or resistant to hierarchy. The video Millennials in the Workforce by David Crossman illustrates how these differences in values can create tensions between millennials and older generations, especially in traditional corporate environments. However, these same values have brought about important changes, such as greater emphasis on diversity and a stronger focus on purpose-driven organizations. Despite their challenges, millennials have proven to be a generation of impact. They have questioned cultural norms, redefined consumption habits, and pushed companies and governments to adapt to a rapidly changing world. More than any previous generation, they have demonstrated how connection, whether digital, social, or emotional, can be a powerful tool for transforming society. Millennials teach us that, even in times of crisis and adversity, it is possible to innovate, challenge the status quo, and fight for a more sustainable and inclusive future. This generation invites us to reflect on the role of technology, human connections, and cultural shifts in building a better world. Generation Z, composed of individuals born between 1997 and 2010, is the first generation fully immersed in the digital world from birth. For them, smartphones, social media, and constant connectivity are not innovations, but fundamental aspects of everyday life. This generation grew up in a globalized, hyper-connected world shaped by global crises such as climate change, pandemics, and structural inequalities. These experiences have uniquely shaped their values, behaviors, and aspirations, positioning them as agents of transformation in a world filled with challenges. Gen Z grew up under the impact of profound historical and economic events. From an early age, they witnessed the effects of the 2008 financial crisis, which disrupted their family's stability, to global social movements such as Fridays for Future, led by Greta Thunberg. This generation is directly connected to issues such as climate change, diversity, and mental health, taking a central role in campaigns that demand accountability from governments, corporations, and individuals. According to Yuval Noah Harari in Homo Deus, this generation lives in a world shaped by technologies that not only enhance human capabilities, but also introduce unprecedented ethical dilemmas. Generation Z is pioneering the use of artificial intelligence and digital tools to amplify their voices, yet they also face the consequences of hyperconnectivity, which can overload their mental health. The excess of information, social media comparisons, and the pressure to stand out in a competitive environment have created a generation that balances transformative potential with significant emotional vulnerabilities. Their engagement with social causes is one of their defining traits. Gen Z does not just consume information about topics like racial equality, climate justice, and LGBTQIA+ rights, they lead movements that drive these causes forward. They use digital platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and X, not just for self-expression, but also to mobilize communities and pressure institutions. This form of digital activism is part of what Bobby Duffy and Generations calls conscious action on a global scale. At the same time, Gen Z faces unique challenges in education and the job market. Growing up in a world where traditional careers are disappearing, they prioritize jobs that offer purpose and flexibility. Many are redefining the meaning of success, opting for less conventional career paths that align more with their personal values. This shift in perspective is a direct response to the economic instability they witnessed during their childhood and adolescence. Another notable characteristic of Generation Z is their relationship with identity. Unlike previous generations who often adhered to fixed categories, Gen Z embraces fluidity. Whether in gender, sexuality, or culture, they challenge norms and stereotypes, advocating for a more inclusive and expansive view of humanity. This mindset not only reflects social evolution, but also highlights the influence of global connections and cultural exchanges, which are now more accessible than ever. Nevertheless, this generation is often criticized, especially by older generations. They are accused of being overly sensitive or disconnected from reality due to their progressive views and reliance on technology. However, these criticisms often ignore the context in which Gen Z was raised, a world of rapid technological transformations, looming environmental crises, and economic instability. As highlighted in the age of unproductive capital, Generation Z inherited a system marked by deepening inequalities, forcing them to seek creative solutions to complex problems. Generation Z is without a doubt a force for change. Although they face significant challenges, such as the impact of hyperconnectivity on their mental health, they also demonstrate an unparalleled ability to use digital tools to drive social and political transformations. They teach us that in a world that is increasingly globalized and interconnected, Empathy, innovation, and collective engagement are essential to overcoming today's challenges and shaping the future. If there is one thing that defines Generation Z, it is their courage to question, innovate, and fight for a world that reflects their values. They remind us that change begins with the ability to imagine new possibilities and to act collectively, even in the face of adversity. Generational conflicts are nothing new. From Socrates, who lamented the lack of respect among young Greeks, to heated debates on Twitter between boomers and millennials, intergenerational tensions have always been part of history. However, in today's world, where technological, economic, and social changes occur at an unprecedented pace, these differences seem more amplified than ever. While there are many criticisms and stereotypes between groups, there are also valuable opportunities for collaboration that can benefit everyone. Intergenerational conflicts often arise from different perspectives on work, values, and priorities. For example, baby boomers grew up in a period of economic prosperity where job stability and material wealth accumulation were highly valued. In contrast, millennials and Gen Z entered the workforce during a time of precarious job markets, making the search for purpose and work-life balance more important than financial security. This difference creates tensions in corporate environments where older generations may see younger workers as uncommitted, while younger generations perceive boomers as conservative and resistant to change. As highlighted in Generations by Bobby Duffy, these stereotypes often oversimplify the complex realities of each generation. Not all boomers are oblivious to social change, just as not all millennials or Gen Zers are averse to hard work. However, media and popular discourse frequently reinforce these divisions, making constructive dialogue more difficult. Another major point of friction between generations is technology usage. For boomers and many from Generation X, the digital revolution was something they had to learn and incorporate into their lives. For millennials and Gen Z, technology has always been a natural extension of their existence. This difference has generated both admiration and misunderstanding. For example, while boomers may see the constant use of smartphones as a distraction, younger people view them as essential tools for work, socialization, and learning. Despite these conflicts, countless examples of intergenerational collaboration demonstrate the power of combining experience with fresh perspectives. One notable example is climate activism, where young leaders like Greta Thunberg, Gen Z, have mobilized millions in global protests, while scientists and older leaders have supported and amplified their demands. This alliance between youthful energy and the wisdom of experience shows how generations can complement each other. In the workplace, intergenerational collaborations are also gaining traction. The video Millennials in the Workforce by David Crossman explores how companies are increasingly valuing teams that mix the innovation and technological fluency of young professionals with the experience and strategic vision of older generations. This approach not only boosts productivity but also creates a more inclusive work environment where each generation can learn from the other. Furthermore, technological advancements and globalization are creating new opportunities for dialogue between generations. Digital platforms allow stories and experiences to be shared on a global scale, facilitating empathy and understanding. As pointed out in Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari, technology, when used effectively, can serve as a bridge to overcome divisions and create collaborative solutions. However, it is important to recognize that generational tensions often reflect deeper structural inequalities. In the age of unproductive capital, Ladislav Dauber argues that young people today inherit an economic system that concentrates wealth and power while leaving them to deal with the costs of environmental and social crises. This dynamic creates resentment, which may be mistaken for mere cultural clashes, but actually signals deeper systemic issues. The challenge, therefore, is not to eliminate conflicts, but to transform them into opportunities for mutual learning. Older generations bring wisdom and experience, while younger generations offer new perspectives and the energy to tackle challenges. When we work together, we can not only overcome our differences, but also develop more effective solutions to global problems. Ultimately, intergenerational conflicts remind us that differences are natural, but progress depends on collaboration. The real battle is not between generations, but against the challenges we face as a society, challenges that can only be overcome by uniting the past, present, and future toward a common goal. As we look to the future, it becomes clear that generations will face increasingly complex and interconnected global challenges. Issues such as climate change, disruptive technological advancements, and rising inequalities cannot be solved by any single group. On the contrary, they demand collaboration, combining the accumulated experience of older generations with the creative innovation of younger ones. In this context, the future of generations is deeply tied to how well we align our values, priorities, and collective efforts. One of the most transformative forces shaping the future will be technology. In Homo Deus, Yuval Noah Harari describes how artificial intelligence and biotechnology are redefining human life. Advanced algorithms, automation, and genetic editing have the potential to completely transform the job market, healthcare, and even human relationships. But these changes also raise profound ethical and social questions. How will Generation Z and Millennials, who are already immersed in a highly digital world, work alongside older generations to ensure these innovations benefit everyone? Climate change is another crucial factor. As discussed in Generations by Bobby Duffy, environmental impact is an issue that transcends borders and generations. Baby boomers and Generation X, who witnessed the early discussions on sustainability, have the historical knowledge and political experience to drive change. At the same time, Millennials and Generation Z bring energy and urgency, mobilizing movements like Fridays for Future. The future depends on how these groups combine efforts to find innovative solutions and implement effective policies to protect the planet. The future of generations will also be shaped by economic challenges. In the age of unproductive capital, Ladislaw Dalbor highlights how wealth concentration and financial capital dominance are creating significant barriers for young and future generations. Job insecurity, rising living costs, and global inequality demand structural changes that can only be achieved through intergenerational cooperation. But will older generations be willing to share power and resources to build a more equitable society? Another central aspect of the future is the increasing fluidity in identity and values. While previous generations grew up in a world where gender roles, cultural identities, and life paths were more rigid, younger generations are challenging these norms. This can create conflicts, but it also presents opportunities to build a world that is more inclusive and adaptable. Intergenerational collaboration will be essential to tackle these challenges. Older generations bring the wisdom of having lived through similar historical cycles, including economic crises and social transformations. In The Fourth Turning, Strauss and Howe argue that history moves in cycles and that times of crisis often lead to periods of renewal. If we seize the opportunity to learn from the past, we can shape a more resilient future. However, this collaboration is not automatic. It will require investment in dialogue and empathy. As Generations points out, it is crucial to overcome stereotypes that often divide generations. Seeing Millennials and Generation Z as merely overly sensitive or obsessed with technology, or reducing boomers to conservative and resistant to change, creates unnecessary barriers. Only by recognizing the unique contributions of each group can we successfully address shared challenges. The future of generations is not just a matter of technology or economics. It is about how we choose to relate to one another. We can either reinforce divisions or build bridges. The future of humanity depends on how well we harness the unique strengths of each generation to create a more sustainable, inclusive, and innovative world. Looking ahead, the greatest challenge and greatest opportunity is learning to combine the historical experience of older generations with the creativity and drive for change of younger ones. After all, the future of generations is, in reality, the future of all of us. Throughout this video, we have explored how generations Baby Boomers, Generation X, Millennials, and Generation Z have been shaped by their times while also shaping the world in their own ways. We have seen that each generation has faced unique challenges and left behind a legacy of achievements, as well as unresolved issues that the following generations have had to and still must address. There is no best generation. What exists are interconnected stories, where the past informs the present and both influence the future. The baby boomers brought advancements in civil rights and fueled a consumer-driven economy. Generation X taught us about resilience and the importance of questioning institutions. Millennials, facing structural crises, reinvented how we work and engage with the world. And Generation Z, born into a hyper-connected world, is already at the forefront of social and climate justice movements. Looking ahead, it is clear that intergenerational collaboration will be essential to solving global challenges. Issues like climate change, rising inequalities, and the technological revolution cannot be tackled by a single generation. They require the joint effort of all of us. When we combine the wisdom of older generations with the energy and creativity of younger ones, we unlock transformative possibilities that go far beyond what any single group could achieve alone. So, here's an invitation for you. Take a moment to reflect on your generation's role in this great historical cycle. What challenges are you facing, and how can you collaborate with other generations to build a fairer, more sustainable future? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And now, we want to hear from you. What is your perspective on generations and their impact on the world? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll continue this conversation there. After all, intergenerational dialogue starts here, with each one of us.